منطقة الخليج تبدو سوقاً واعدة للهيدروجين الأخضر في ظل وفرة مصادر الطاقات المتجددة، لكن الأسئلة ما زالت كثيرة حول تكلفة إنتاجه والفرصة البديلة لاستخدام الكهرباء الذي يتم إنتاجها من الطاقة المتجددة مباشرة بدلاً من توجيهها لإنتاج الهيدروجين. ضيفنا التالي مانويل وهو نائب الرئيس لمبيعات الهيدروجين في سيمنز إنرجي، يرى أن الأمر يحتاج إما إلى شجاعة من قبل المستثمرين وإما إلى دعم حكومي في هذه المرحلة من التحول، لأن التقنيات ما زالت حديثة نسبياً ويحيط بها وبسلاسل إمداداتها الكثير من المخاطر، لكنه يراهن على انخفاض التكاليف مستقبلاً مع التطور التقني والتوسع في تصنيع أجهزة أكبر حجماً للتحليل الكهربائي للمياه. لنتابع.
There is a large growth expected in the hydrogen market in the region for the simple reason that the region has always been an energy exporter and it will be an energy exporter in the future. However, the way how we produce and export energy and what quality that energy has, this will change. And hydrogen will play a major role in the transition towards a more greener, more sustainable energy future.
And in which sectors do you think that hydrogen will play that role?
On a global scale, there are a couple of sectors that will probably adopt fuels with a lower carbon content much earlier. For example, shipping is one that is very much on the forefront today, mainly driven by regulation, but also driven by some of the large global players who make it a priority on their agenda to come to a more sustainable means of transportation.
What about other sectors like fuel, energy storage?
So on the long run, and that is when we have reached certain scale in the production of low carbon hydrogen, we will see other sectors to adopt as well. That could be sectors like energy generation, heating, fertilizers, for example, aviation via sustainable aviation fuel, and there are various other aspects. The key question is, where do we find in the near future those pockets of industries that allow us to pay a premium for a decarbonized energy usage? And we have to be very careful where we allocate these sectors so that we don't overburden also the consumer side with additional cost, but we also have to get the transition going in order to achieve our targets to fight climate change.
We heard a lot about new projects, hydrogen projects. Do you think there will be a good demand for the hydrogen?
The key question is how we match supply and demand. And that is not only on the equipment side where we are working in Siemens Energy, but it's more importantly on the side of off-taking the hydrogen and off-taking the green product that is finally used. Oftentimes, hydrogen is an early feedstock in a production process. So the effect has to trickle down the full supply chain. For example, if you take green hydrogen that is used to produce green steel, then the green steel gets in a consumer product, let's say a car, and then the car has a certain share or the full availability of green steel inside that car. And if you look at it from the end product's perspective, the incremental cost for using green steel, for example, is not that much.
We know that hydrogen is highly energy intensive and we don't have clean energy enough in the grid. Do you think that will affect the expanding of the hydrogen?
The underlying assumption on the producing green hydrogen, for example, is that you have a large surplus on green electricity. That is why the region here is so important, because the properties in the region give us the opportunity to produce renewable energies in very large scale. The region has shown this already. And that means ultimately it's a competitive advantage because the sun is shining, in some of the countries the wind is blowing very well, we have land available, we have the capacity and the capabilities to build up large renewable energy plants. So first we have to make sure that we ramp up the capacity for renewable energy generation without compromising the usage of this green electricity in our day-to-day electricity usage. And then second, we have to make sure that all this additional energy can be transported from A to B and get to the final end user. And yes, we will need to have more investments into the grids. Maybe not so much in the Middle East because a lot of the grids here are relatively new and also have large capacities. But for example, in other regions like in Europe or the US, expanding the grid and making the grid resilient to these additional loads is a very important topic.
Hydrogen market look promising, but there is a lot of challenge like interest rate and the cost. Do you think that it will affect its growth?
We are in a transition towards a market. As of today, we see that a lot of the projects needs either very bold moves from their investors or subsidies from the government. A lot of the low carbon fuel applications are by the one way or the other subsidized. And it is needed to this, like this because the technology is relatively young. There's still a lot of risk in the supply chain and the technology, which ultimately makes the projects more expensive. As we progress and as we learn, those costs will go down. And as we produce the equipment in larger scale, we also get the cost down sheer through scale effects. So in a few years, but it could be even a decade, you will see that the costs go down. But for the intermediate time, we need to find the right pockets where we can make the business cases work.